Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, I wanted to follow up on my last video about voting rights. I received a couple of comments that I want to respond to, but before I do that, I want to address this issue that's been raised. Mitch McConnell, the senator from I think it's Kentucky, made some controversial remarks. And I just want to take time to talk about those remarks and address the substance of what he had to say. So I'm going to share my screen. And also, I'm going to respond to these people that left some silly comments to my video. So let me share my screen. Okay, so Mitch McConnell gave a press conference. And he gave this press conference, after the Senate voted down filibuster rule changes and after, I think it was after they voted down this voting rights reform. And, basically during this press conference, a reporter raised questions about people not being able to go forward. Like this reporter, as this article says, it says that the reporter raised the extreme version of concerns about the change to Mitch McConnell, referring to the legislation that would no longer move forward. And this is what the reporter said. What's your message for voters of color who are concerned that without the John L. Lewis Voting Rights Act, they're not going to be able to vote in the midterm? And he said, well, that concern is misplaced. This is what Mitch McConnell said, because if you look at the statistics, African-American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans. So I'm going to stop right there for a second and then pick up with further commentary. So the concern about that is just like, that shows how Mitch McConnell and how Republicans in general view African Americans. Now, I know that they're going to say it was a slip of tongue. He really meant to say all Americans, whatever. The fact of the matter is that these Republicans view African Americans as other. They view us as foreign, and they are hostile to us exercising our right to vote. And this reminds me of another point. Like often you will hear these people on YouTube basically suggest that Republicans and Democrats are one and the same, that there is no difference between the two parties. And this whole fight over voting rights reform highlights just how wrong those people are. It highlights the fact that there are fundamental differences between the two parties. You have one party that overwhelmingly voted in support of voting rights, and that's the Democratic Party. You had one party do everything in their power to obstruct and prevent this very important voting rights legislation from being passed, and that's your Republican Party. They are doing everything in their power to make it more difficult for African Americans to vote. When you look at the jurisdictions that are passing these voter suppression laws without a doubt that are designed to make it more difficult for African Americans to vote, it's the Republicans passing those laws. It's the Republican appointed judges on the Supreme Court that voted to gut the Voting Rights Act. So there is a clear distinction between these two parties. And this highlights just how important it is for Black people to vote in these elections. Despite what you're hearing from these online slacktivists like, Tariq Nasheed telling you to hold your vote and, have launching ridiculous don't vote campaigns. These elections are crucial. And these midterm elections that are coming up are very important because they will determine what kind of laws get passed in Congress. So yeah, we have to look at this seriously, and we have to understand that there are differences between these parties. Um, the Republicans don't want you to vote because they know that you tend not to vote for Republicans. So that's the first point that I wanted to highlight. The next point that I want to go into is just the substance of what he had to say. Um, and this article does a great job of responding to it. So I want to highlight some of the arguments that are raised in this article. So I'm going to share my screen again. So this article goes on to respond to some of these assertions. Like the first thing that it points out is that Black voter turnout exceeded the national voter turnout in 2008 and 2012. And then after that, for all other periods, as this points out, um, Black voter turnout and Hispanic turnout have been below the white voter turnout rate, as pointed out in this article. And this article cites sources, and you can read this article for yourself. Um, and we know why there was a large turnout in 2008 and 2012. That was around the time when President Obama was running for office and for reelection. So you had a lot of enthusiasm around his election. So that is the reason why you had high voter turnout in those particular times. Um, Another thing is, like Mitch McConnell mentioned, how in the last election you had a very large turnout of African Americans and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is that there was a large turnout period among all voters because the vote had been made more accessible as a result of the coronavirus, as pointed out in this article. We know that because of the pandemic, there is a fear of people congregating. So they gave people the option to mail in ballots, and that made it more accessible. And the ballots were mailed to all registered voters and stuff. So that made the ballot box more accessible. So you had a large voter turnout. And in response to that large voter turnout, as pointed out in this article, many states, like 19 states, passed new laws scaling back voter access, making it more difficult for people to have access to the ballot. And many of these measures disproportionately impact Black voters, thereby suppressing Black votes. So that is the issue. The fact that these people are trying to suppress the Black vote. And ever since the Voting Rights Act was gutted after the Shelby County versus Holder decisions, many jurisdictions have passed laws to try to make it more difficult for African Americans in particular and other so-called minorities to vote, to make it more difficult for them to vote. So that's why we need to have voter protection in place to prevent these states from trying to suppress the Black vote. And again, you have many examples of this. Um, so, despite these arguments, the fact of the matter is we do need voter reform, voter law reform. We do need the John Lewis Act passed, and we need to understand the urgency of this issue. Um, Another point that's made in this particular article is an argument raised by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and basically she talked about how you don't throw away an umbrella because it's working well. Like if there's a rainstorm, you're not going to go without your umbrella. Because it's working well, like you're in the middle of a rainstorm and your umbrella is preventing you from getting wet. You're not going to say, oh, my umbrella is doing its job, so let me get rid of the umbrella. I no longer need the umbrella. That's absurd. And that's the same with voting rights. And that's exactly what happened when they gutted the Voting Rights Act. Of course, you still have some provisions that protect the voting rights, but that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was a key component. It prevented jurisdictions that had a whole long history of discriminating against Black voters from implementing voter changes without oversight, without pre-clearance. And that was necessary to prevent discriminatory voting laws from being put in place um, ahead of time. Now we have to deal with a situation where laws can be put in place, they can have their impact, suppress the black vote, and then people have to go to court to try to fight that. And often they don't, these different civil rights advocates don't have the same resources that a justice department would have. Um, so it just leaves us all vulnerable. It makes it more difficult for us to protect voters' rights. So yeah, I wanted to address that, and then the next thing I want to go into is like some of these comments that people left. Like some of these comments are just so ignorant. As this person points out, our D Hawk points out that these responses in the comments are crazy. They're absolutely absurd. And some of these people are posing as ADOS type people, like this person right here. This person, this person says good, and then he says FBA ADOS rise up, and it has like a muscle there. And like I don't know who this person is. I don't know if they're a real person or they're a troll or a government agent, but whether consciously or unconsciously, like these types of people not only are undermining Black unity, but they are undermining Black people, period. With this kind of rhetoric, like why would any Black man in their right mind or Black person in their right mind celebrate the blocking of this very important voting rights legislation? So, I asked this guy, I said, why do you think it's good? As you can see here, and this person said, what's good is non-citizens can't vote. Now, this comment is so ridiculous because none of these none of these voting rights reforms are designed to make it possible for non-citizens to vote. I mean, it's just a dumb, stupid comment. And, I think this kind of rhetoric only undermines, you know, um, the Black community. It undermines our efforts to enforce voting rights or to have, to reform the laws so that we can have more access to the right to vote. And it's just a shame that like these people pander to this xenophobia and this hatred of immigrants to such a degree that they're undermining the very Black community that they claim to be so concerned about. And I'm going to post a link to, this summary of the Voting Rights Act, um, so that you can read it for yourself, so that you'll know what this act is about and understand the history behind it. There is no provision in here about illegal immigrants being able to vote. There's nothing in here about that. There's information in here about voting, like multilingual districts or districts where, uh, people that speak a second language. There are provisions that deal with that, but none of these provisions are talking about giving non-citizens the right to vote. And it's this type of rhetoric that these right-wing people are using to stand in the way of our voting rights. Um, so yeah, I encourage you all to read this particular post from, this post from Wikipedia, and it cites its sources, so you can go directly to the sources as well. And also, I encourage you to go to the Congress website and actually read the legislation in its entirety on your own, so that you will see just how false these types of ridiculous claims are made by these trolls, these faceless trolls. And it just makes me wonder, like, who are these trolls working for? What is their purpose here? Like these trolls, these ADOS buffoons and idiots, like and these FBA people, these Tariq Nasheed followers, sheeple. Uh, those are the same people that were basically encouraging you not to vote for president. basically just paving the way, trying to pave the way for one of the most racist presidents to be reelected, and that's Donald Trump. So how in the hell are these people serving and benefiting the Black community that they claim to be so concerned about? So yeah, that's what I had to say about that. It's so absurd, so ridiculous. Shout out to everybody in the chat. I know it's super early, and I just had to do this live stream before I hit the gym. I want to thank you all for your support. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, and hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Please spread the word about this channel. Encourage your friends and family to subscribe. Peace and blessings. Have a great day, everybody.